Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for carving out the time to join us this evening. My name is Fred Lee. I am the Director of Alumni Engagement at Alumni UBC at the University of British Columbia. First, let me start by acknowledging that we are on the territory of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish people. Secondly, to extend warm welcome to all of you for joining us at our Your Next Step Workplace Trends panel discussion. I want to thank our friends at the Center for Student Involvement and Careers for their support, and I want to welcome their guests who are here tonight. It's great to see a wonderful turnout on a Monday evening. Can't say enough about our presenting sponsor, Cathay Pacific, who are the generous supporter of this series. I want to especially welcome Business Development Manager Kevin Pullman, who has joined us this evening. It says here in my notes, it may be questionable whether he would arrive on time, but of course it's Cathay Pacific, so you got here from Asia just fine. So welcome. And if anyone wants to learn more about their new routes to the Americas, to Europe, please speak to Kevin at the reception. Tonight marks the final installment of our 7th season of this career development program, and we have a wonderful discussion ahead. We'd also like to thank our media and broadcast sponsor, CBC. Yes. I see you brought your fan club, Gloria. Party of one. There you go. I'm with you. And our event series sponsor, Manulife Alumni Insurance, for their ongoing support of these very important discussions in our community. So, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking all of our sponsors. As a key legacy of our recently completed Start an Evolution alumni engagement and fundraising campaign that concluded on September 30th, we officially opened as well the doors to the spectacular building, the Robert H. Lee Alumni Center, a home for alumni for life, right at the heart of the Vancouver campus. You just saw very briefly a short video showcasing our beautiful building. It is named after UBC's most dedicated volunteer, donor, alumni, Bob Lee, and it is the first of its kind in Canada, a living symbol of the partnership between UBC and its alumni. So we look forward to welcoming our 307,000 alumni to their new home on campus. Of course, not all at once, but we do hope that you will attend a future Your Next Step event or a dialogues or the Alumni Achievement Awards that will be taking place in this beautiful building. It really is a place to satisfy your intellectual, cultural, and social appetites as you engage with fellow alumni, students, faculty, and emeriti. So UBC Centennial is a year-long program of initiatives marking 100 years of learning, research innovation, and community engagement. Over the past century, UBC is proud to have graduated more than 307,000 students from our Point Grey and Okanagan campuses who are making positive change in British Columbia, Canada, and in 144 countries around the world. We will conclude our centennial year this May. I invite you all to visit our centennial website, ubc100.ca, for a list of activities and celebrations, and as well, for all of you alumni in the room, to pin your story on our Centennial Interactive Global Map. I'm just curious, a show of hands, how many alumni do we have in the room? Oh, fantastic. Well, welcome. Usually at this point, we would encourage all of you to turn off your cell phones, but not myself, not tonight. We would invite you to put them on silent, but as well, we invite you all to tweet the event at Alumni UBC, and the hashtag is UBC Next Step, all one word. As well, for many of you who have joined us at some of our activities in the last couple of years, we're going to continue using our very cool audience engagement platform to engage everyone in the conversation tonight. So if you have a mobile device, whether that is a smartphone, a tablet, a laptop, please take 30 seconds right now to get that device out and go to alumniubc.cnf.io. Again, that URL should be projected on the screen, alumniubc.cnf.io. The UBC is always ahead of the curve, and we're very proud to have been using this technology that has just been introduced to some of the TED Talks. As mentioned, we've already been engaged in this platform for the last couple of years. And this platform will allow you to ask questions and comment in real time throughout the discussion. Our attendees can like your question, and when we get to the Q&A portion of the evening, we will endeavor to pose the top questions from the audience to the panel. So again, the URL is alumniubc.cnf.io. And you will have noted for a trial run, we have populated a polling question related to tonight's discussion. And I know there are a few employers in the room. The question we have posed to all of you is, what do you like most about your employer? So take the time to answer that now. And very shortly, the results should be projected on the screen. There we go. Right now it says it's the people I work with, the work it allows me to do. It gives you a sense of how people are feeling. So this is the audience engagement app that we'll be using throughout the evening, and we invite you all for your comments and questions. According to BC Business and their recent survey, the highest ranked answer was the people I work with. So we look forward to hearing more about this from our panelists this evening. Many of you are probably wondering why your next step. So as mentioned, this is our 7th year. This event is part of a larger career program called Your Next Step. Our alumni have told us that they want more information, guidance, and programming about careers as new graduates, young alumni, and mid-career alumni. So we created the Your Next Step program in response to you. To maximize impact, some programming takes the form of in-person events, such as the one tonight, but we have also provided podcasts, webinars, and profiles of alumni, all available on our website and our digital library. This evening, we will hear from alumni and community experts who are leaders in their field. One of these experts is our very own Shalina Esmail, who is a member of our Alumni UBC Board of Directors. So welcome. Their conversation will be podcast at alumni.ubc.ca, and the videotaped conversation will also be made available on the Irving K. Barber Learning Center's website. So on behalf of UBC, I want to welcome and thank our speakers for their time and talent. So now it's my pleasure to introduce tonight's moderator, a very good friend and colleague, Gloria Makarenko. Gloria is a longtime CBC News host and award-winning journalist who takes the host seat on BC Almanac, connecting British Columbians through conversation, and as well hosts Our Vancouver, a current affairs television show, as well as our national Radio 1 show, The Story from Here. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm welcome to your moderator and host tonight, Gloria Makarenko.
Thank you, Fred. Thank you. Well, good evening to all of you, and thank you for braving the rain and coming in despite the inclement weather outside. It's certainly my pleasure to be part of this discussion tonight, and we've got some really interesting panelists to round out the discussion. I think what I'm most interested in is hearing from you, hearing your perspectives, your questions, sort of what's the most burning issue, because the future really is all about you who are recent grads or fairly new to the workplace as well. I mean, obviously, Vancouver is a beautiful place to live. This West Coast lifestyle is an obvious draw. But we all know all of the stories that have been in the news in the last little while about raising real estate prices, job satisfaction in general, people saying, you know, there's a real challenge for employers and for younger people in the workforce as well. You know, how do you shape your workplace? How do you shape that culture? How do you offer flexibility and benefits to attract the city's top talent, to keep them here, to keep that environment stimulating for them? Yeah, I mean, it is a challenge for both sides of the equation. So what we're going to look at tonight is some of the current trends, I guess, in the workplace, and how the reality of high prices and potential of long commutes will affect your decisions about where you decide to work. How is the culture of the modern workplace changing? Where do the opportunities exist? What are some of the challenges ahead? So we have some wonderful panelists. I'll ask you to come and take your seats now as I do introduce them. I had Matt O'Grady on the coast this afternoon on CBC Radio. We had a little precursor to this, so I hope you weren't listening, because he gave it all away. No, I think it was a good way to sort of set the scene for the conversation about workplace trends. Directly to my right is Chris Hatton. He was appointed Chief Operating Officer for HSBC Bank Canada in July of 2015 after holding senior management roles across the bank in both the UK and North America since 1996. He's worked in New York. Chris's experience in the international banking world will certainly bring an important perspective to tonight's workplace trends discussion. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you.
Shalina Esmail received a Bachelor of Arts degree from UBC, as you just heard Fred say. She's a partner at PFM Executive Search. She previously worked for Colliers International in Vancouver and in California. Her professional experience and her depth of business knowledge provides a rich foundation for leading senior executives to some of Canada's most successful organizations. Shalina is a dedicated community volunteer, and UBC is lucky to have her sitting on the Alumni UBC Board of Directors. Prem Gill took the reins as CEO of Creative BC this past September. Creative BC is a provincial agency that oversees film and television production in BC. That's an exciting industry for sure, right from the development funding to the shoot locations. She brings more than 20 years experience in the industry. She has a diverse background in film and television broadcasting, communications and media, digital technology, including positions at TELUS, at City TV, and at CHUM. And finally, as I mentioned, Matt O'Grady. He serves as editor-in-chief of BC Business. He's an award-winning communications professional who's held senior leadership positions at both regional and national media companies. He's worked for the Globe and Mail in Toronto and here in Vancouver. He has deep ties within the Vancouver media community, having served as an editor at Vancouver Magazine and Western Living Magazine, worked as an online editor for CBC British Columbia, and he's also taught nonfiction writing and editing courses at Langara College and Capilano University. Give our panelists a warm welcome, a wealth of experience here. So just a couple of comments before we move on about the format of this Your Next Step event. So I will be asking the panelists a number of questions. We'll get a little bit of a conversation going up here on the stage. And then we'll turn the floor over to you. So if there's something that tweaks your interest or some particular field or avenue of conversation you'd like to explore a little bit more, please have your questions ready. We'd love to extend that conversation into the audience as well, and we'll do that for about another 30 minutes or so. Also, there will be a reception after the event, so you're welcome to mix and mingle and maybe have a little bit more of a up-close and personal conversation with our panelists as well. A reminder, we are recording this evening's event, and the evening program is going to be made available as an audio podcast and a video recording on the Alumni UBC website. So now let's dive into the discussion. And to start things off, we thought it would be kind of interesting to start with some stats, or sort of, let's frame the conversation, shall we? And to help us do that, I'm going to ask Matt O'Grady to come up and talk about your recent survey.
Am I going to steal
the
microphone? Yeah.
I think you can talk from your...
I could probably talk from over here, over there. I can do that as well.
Yep.
Yeah, why don't I do that, because I can, that way you don't have to
Can
move.
you see from there?
Yeah, I'll just crane my neck around, actually. So just so you know, I mean, some of you will have seen there was a copy of the magazine which this appeared in, I think at reception. So this is from the December issue of the magazine, and it was a survey we did just looking at what British Columbians as a whole felt about their work environment and their sort of philosophy about work. And so these were a few of the key findings that we thought would be worth bringing into the discussion tonight about work. And so I'm going to off my cheat sheet because my eyes aren't that good. The slides we have here are attributes that people feel describe what they most like about their employer, and then the things that they least like about their employer. So, and some of you had the opportunity to, was it the most like or the least like, the question that you put up? Most like, right. So, as Fred pointed out, you have a lot in common with your fellow British Columbians, and indeed with the rest of Canada. And you notice there's not a lot of differences between BC and the rest of Canada. So the most important things are the people I work with, the work environment, and the work it allows me to do. Now, paycheck is in there too. The interesting thing I would note about that is go to the list of things that you like least about your employer. The rest of Canada is actually a lot more negative about what they're getting paid than British Columbians.
That's me too close to the mic.
So it's statistically significant. I think my mic might have gone off. But in the rest of Canada, 16% say that it's the thing that they like least about their employer. In BC, it's 10%. And then, just trying to see what else there. The other thing is benefits. So it's sort of tied in with pay. The rest of Canada tends to gripe a lot more about their benefits than we do in BC. That is part of a bigger picture, which the next slide will illustrate, which is that generally speaking, we're a happy bunch. And not just in terms of am I satisfied with my current employer. It's about the same with BC and the rest of Canada, and this is what we're going to talk a lot about, I think, tonight, is the two, what do you call those things? They're not pie charts, they're circular graphs. I don't know. But what you notice there is on the question of, I would not move away from my province no matter what I might get paid elsewhere. In the rest of Canada, it's a quarter of the population, 25%. In BC, it's more than a third. It's 34%. Would not move away no matter what they were being paid. And that speaks to the point that Gloria mentioned off the top, which is that there's some inherent attractiveness about being in BC. It draws people here. It keeps people here, which is a good thing. But there's some perils in there for both employers and employees. And it's probably a good place to start.
Now I'll turn on my microphone so I won't be interfering with the podium microphone. What about those stats? Maybe we could just do a little bit of a run along the other panelists. Is there something that stood out for you, Prem?
So Creative BC, we're responsible for the creative industries, including film and television. And in the last 5 years, we've really seen a growth in the visual effects and animation industries. We're actually the world leader now in terms of globally. We think we have, from what the numbers are looking like, more people working in the visual effects industry than anywhere else in the world. And we've beat out London. And part of that has been attracting companies to wanting to come here and open up their head offices like Sony ImageWorks and Double Negative. And these are really interesting workplaces because they are, the average age I think is about 29, the average wage is about $70,000. These are considered decent wages for, I guess, that point in your career. But there's also that lifestyle happiness element is a big part of it, from anecdotally, from what we see and what we know. And the reason we're also responsible for music, books, magazines, and digital media, meaning the video game industry. And it's so different across, we can talk about books and magazines, but the publishing industry. But we do stick around here. And I think that's kind of the most interesting thing that we were talking about earlier in the green room was, we've managed to attract some businesses that are new. Like, this is a new industry for us. It's always been there in smaller parts, but it's new. And there's a reason they're coming here, and it's the talent.
That's good. Shalina, what stood out for you?
Well, I think, what's really interesting looking at the slide is that it talked about folks around their wages and their salary. And I think what's an important fact to know is that salary levels here in BC are actually one of the lowest compared to Canada's, the rest of Canada. So if you compare British Columbia salaries to those in Alberta and Ontario, we're actually less. So we're actually happier with even less salary across the board. So that's interesting. And I think part of that is as we start to recruit people to British Columbia, and I'm generally speaking to people that are in leadership roles or in some sort of a management position, they're not always coming for the money. They're coming for a different reason. And sometimes it's family, sometimes it's returning home, a lot of times it's lifestyle, and they're willing to trade dollars. So that's interesting.
Chris, I'm thinking about you from an employer's perspective, when you're hearing that your employees don't really, money's not a huge deal. Does that mean you say, I'll remember that in the next negotiating session? What stood out for you?
I think for me it just wasn't surprising. It's how those stats, how those numbers really resemble my experience of arriving in BC 6-9 months ago, whenever it was, and what I see in terms of the team I lead and the people we have working for us in HSBC here. The average tenure, the lack of turnover in the employment population is really quite marked, and very different from where I was previously in New York or even London. You see that kind of settledness and that draw of the BC environment. And I talk to my wife and my 4-year-old, and I absolutely know why it happens, and clearly I'm never leaving. Well,
I'm interested. We were talking a little bit about New York and London, how that feeds your climbing, your career climbing, and then you come to Vancouver with your 4-year-old and say,
Yeah, and look, I wouldn't want anybody to think that it is a relaxing or a retirement gig for me. I'm not nearly old enough to do that.
Okay.
But I think it is a bit about different challenges, different demands, different levels of autonomy for me personally, in terms of the scale of the business that you've got to manage here, and actually how remote you are in a global organization from the mothership. An 8-hour time difference means that you do get a certain amount of independence in Vancouver that you perhaps don't get in other parts of our organization. So I think there are different challenges. For me, it's a different time of my life, a different time of my career, and it's an opportunity to test some different kind of leadership skills in my portfolio.
well, we are already getting some suggested questions, so thank you for making this an interactive experience. Here's one. Media in Canada, but especially in Vancouver, relies a lot on freelancers or casuals. We certainly see this at CBC. A lot of casual employees, to get a full-time contract gig now is fairly rare. Do you see this trend growing or not? Maybe we'll start with the media types at the other end. Mac?
Well, so I've worked predominantly in the magazine business. It's a bit different in the sense that we've always, historically, has always relied very heavily on freelance contributions. Insofar as the stories that you see published in the magazine are predominantly written by freelancers. The photography, we don't have a staff photographer, we don't have a staff illustrator. So that's stuff that's always been freelance. The staff is relatively small and getting smaller at a lot of magazines. But where you see probably more, and other people here can speak to, is in other types of media, which historically had a large staff, but that's been shrinking as sort of the business conditions have changed for those organizations. So.
And I would say that media trend isn't unique to Vancouver. That it's happening internationally. It's global. It's happening in every city in Canada, where we've seen, when I worked at City TV in Vancouver, they canceled the news. There was no more 6 o'clock newscast.
No news is good news, apparently.
Apparently. But, different, and this was really kind of before, I think it was 2005-ish, and it was even before, blogs had the presence that they do now. But I think where we are seeing the growth and adjustment, because we deal a lot with people who are wanting to make films, actually creating their own IP. but they spend their days working in the service sector, in the production services industry, so they might be working on Deadpool during the day, but on the weekends they're still trying to do their short films. And that's always kind of been the case here in British Columbia, is that balance between we're such a partner to the industry in Los Angeles that those jobs continue to develop and grow. We've never ever in history been as busy as we are now. But as I was saying earlier, there's now this technical artistic side, which I mean I could still consider those media jobs. They're not journalism jobs. But that whole business, I think, is changing, and I think everybody's trying to figure it out together or in some way. But we've never consumed more content either. Like I have Netflix, Show Me, Crave, my Optic TV, like everything. And there's still like, I don't know what to watch. You know, like there's still sometimes just,
The 57 channels and nothing's on.
yeah, but there's such an abundance and such an opportunity there as well. And for an agency like Creative BC, we're an economic development agency. So really trying to look at what are we doing to drive that development? What kind of programs can we run that will serve and really building an industry that's kind of going through massive change here right now?
Okay, I'd like to hear from Charlene and Chris on this as well. Is this unique to the media industry when we're talking about casuals?
I don't think it is at all. I mean, I think if you think about just the way industry and business has changed, Netflix is a great example. Started out as a mail order company and is now doing online streaming. The types of resources that you need to be able to execute against that are changing at a pace that I think have never been there before. So actually people with portfolio skills that can move between jobs and take different experiences into different roles become far more attractive. And from an industry perspective, the reliance on casual contract, freelance work to be able to facilitate that, I think is going to continue to grow.
In your particular job search, excuse me, I didn't mean to cut you off there.
No, go on.
Okay, I mean, are you looking for part-time workers or?
No, you know, I mean, again, if we talked about the executive level and the executive search level, rarely. I mean, for the most part, we will do some interim positions, but generally they're going to be full-time roles in leadership positions. I think that a lot of our clients, though, will have brought on consulting staff to help support the skill that's not there. And we talked about this as well in the green room, is the fact that there's folks that will come up the technology side, or they'll come up more of the arts or the humanities, social science side, but where there's a lack of skill set, and it could be at graduates or 10 years into the workforce, is kind of a marriage of the two. Because everything nowadays, when you look at different corporations, there's a real shift to user experience. And so the only way you can understand user experience is to understand what the consumer wants, and then how you can build the technology around it. And so the shift to the reliance on software as the means to grow a company. So how do you leverage that technology? And so you do need to understand the humanity piece, and you also need to understand the technology side. So I think, you know, as leaders start to develop and grow in their own organizations, they need to understand how they can marry those two.
Well, this kind of leads us into our next question, what you're talking about, sort of marrying those two things. This question, what role should employers, for example, the tech sector, play in attracting younger talent to stay in the province and avoid moving? And avoid, I thought we were going to go to another question. That one moved up before. But so what do companies do? How do companies react? Chris, do you want to start?
Well, look, I mean, I think it's sensible for companies to have a strategy around how you build engagement, around how you attract talent. And I think it's been open to the different ideas of the changing needs of the workforce that allows us to keep attracting that rich seam of talent. So companies have got a huge role to play. It's not, in my view at least, specifically around encouraging people to stay in BC. It's about encouraging people to be engaged and want to come and work for the brand, the operation, the business that you're in. And if you've made a decision to base in BC, then of course you want people to stay and balance that out in this locality. So I think in terms of how we offer flexibility, what the benefits packages are structured like to be affordable, the types of working environment and the types of experiences and opportunities we can present to people is is absolutely critical.
Do you have those conversations with employees that, hey, I mean, I can't make ends meet. This is really tough. I've had to move. I've got a longer commute now because I can no longer live close to the downtown core or close to head office or that type of thing. Do you hear that from the staff?
So, I mean, honestly, I don't typically. And I think part of that is the amount of flexibility that I've seen us introduce over the last, 5 years or so in terms of home working, in terms of people no longer need to be coming into the office quite so regularly. I think there is a lot more opportunity leveraging collaboration technologies for people to work very, very differently, and that allows them to shape their lifestyle and their situation around the opportunities that come along. But you've just got to find that right balance for people that makes the value exchange effective.
Do any of you have examples of how companies are doing a good job in striking that, I guess, generational balance? You talked about the people coming in and the need for that tech-savvy young workforce because they're hardwired. There's no doubt about it. There you have a more mature, experienced people that have been around for 20 or 30 years, and there's quite a gap in between the two. Are there examples where you can see where companies are adapting in that way to not make the older employees feel like, okay, we're done with you now, but we need their experience? So
I can speak to my experience at TELUS because it is very much a multi-generational culture where there was companies, essentially 2, 3, 4 companies came together to form TELUS, I guess now 10 plus years ago. And there's a lot of focus on employee engagement, like there is at a lot of large corporations. And as a senior manager there, your bonus is actually attached to how engaged your team is. So it's a constant stealth-like focus that you have to regularly report back. And
how do you show that your team is engaged?
Well, they do surveys. That's sort of the biggest tool is employee engagement surveys that every manager gets the results back, and it'll actually show what people are happy about and what they're not happy about. Having that dialogue, like nothing should surprise you when you get one of these surveys. You should know kind of where your team's at. If you are, teaching this EQ, they call it, emotional quotient, is that what they call it? It's sort of a new methodology, like it's newish, I guess, in the last few years of leadership training. They focus a lot on leadership training across generations. So I actually have been to sessions where, actually I was at South by Southwest a few years ago where I was at a session, I'm a Gen Xer, where it was Gen X managers and millennial workers. How do you talk to each other? And it was this quite a funny, a small group of people, like maybe 30 people, but it's that kind of dialogue that I saw happening at a company like TELUS as well. It's like actually understanding different needs for different generations and the kind of recognition or feedback that different generations need, and that's okay. And everybody kind of understanding that there's different methods for different people, but then you also see, maybe a Gen Xer saying, oh, I actually like that kind of way of getting this feedback mechanism or whatever it is, and that becomes more built into kind of developing your culture. The work at home thing is big too. While I was at TELUS, they implemented this work at home culture where I think now at least 70% of the workforce works at home at least 2 to 3 days a week, maybe more for some people. The challenge with that is how do you actually build a team culture with your small team? Because there's the big company and then there's your own team. So you start to develop different methods and tools within, and how do you bring new people on who are new to the company and don't get this? So it comes with those challenges, but that's been an example of a big company like that is actually one of the few headquartered big companies in Canada based here that has really adapted that across the country. And that comes with real estate savings, but also you had to move to Langley. You're now commuting. Your commute is only 1 day a week, so you can pick up your kid at daycare and not be driving for 2 hours, and you're actually getting more work done during those 6 hours that you're working, or whatever it is.
Okay. Any other examples of companies that bridge that generational divide in particular?
I'm not sure if it's so much that bridge the generational divide, but we did a story not so long ago about Build Direct, which is a online building supplies company based out of Vancouver. So very different than TELUS, and that it's quite small. But they introduced, and got a fair bit of press at the time, introduced a policy a couple months of unlimited vacation time. And to me, and there was a lot of debate about what that actually means, and like, if you decide, are you going to take 6 months off, is your boss actually going to approve that? But it speaks to what's sort of this growing trend, and I think the telecommuting is part of this, of trusting your employees, which is not the historic model of businesses. Businesses were command and control. This was the policy. It got, dispersed to the sub-managers, and the sub-managers,
Checks
implemented
and balances,
it. Yeah,
that's
so
right.
it very much sort of the army model of managing. And now you're increasingly seeing a lot of this from big companies to small companies, the telecommuting, the unlimited vacation, the idea that we trust you to get, we're going to be task-oriented as opposed to rules-oriented. There's things that have to get done, but how you do it, we're not going to micromanage that anymore. And that's where you see a lot of the tech companies were sort of on the avant-garde of that, because they were bringing in, the foosball tables and the beer fridges and that sort of thing. So we trust you to have a break and have fun, and here's a room in the side of the office where you can play guitar on your lunch hour, whatever it is. And I've seen, in our magazine, we tell stories about this all the time. There's all these kind of fun variations on a theme, which is that, we trust you to do your own thing as long as you, get the job done. And so I think that's something which definitely is more enticing to a younger generation, that A, wants to be trusted, but B, wants to have that a bit more of a work-life balance. I guess that doesn't really answer the question of how it bridges the divide, but I think for a lot of companies that are trying to bring in a motivated younger workforce, that's sort of been the answer.
Yeah, no, we're getting at trends in
Yeah.
essence. So
Yeah.
is this a trend you're both seeing as well?
Well, I find that it's at the entry level, you're going to attract a lot of folks that way. If you're starting to make the climb up the corporate ladder, so to speak, and you're thinking about that next leadership role, I guess what I only say is what do you watch out for? What can go wrong in a scenario where there is all that the trust, or you're working away from home? And I think part of it is we're so used to having a lot of relationships. So our networks now amongst just ourselves and our kids and our parents, it's very wide. And so we're connected with so many people at all times, but these connections are quite shallow. What we're missing are some of the deeper relationships. And I think if you start to separate who's going to excel and become leaders in their organizations, it's ones that probably take a little bit more time in creating deeper relationships. And so you have to find a way to use the new trends.
The Facebook model you're describing is very long and very
exactly
not
right.
very
But how do
deep.
you build those relationships? Because if you want to eventually move into a management role, you're going to have to communicate. You're going to have to hear from them and get some feedback. So I think those are important things to remember.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. The skill of stakeholder management is becoming much more important to people much earlier in the career, and the opportunity to have multiple bosses and around the matrix and have to navigate through that environment, I think, is hitting people far earlier and at far more junior levels in organisations as the hierarchies kind of flatten as a trend. So, to Shamila's point, the people that are successful are those that can manage those relationships and who can seek out mentorship and find guidance from older, more senior people. And I think it's really incumbent on anybody in the workplace to actively seek that guidance going forward.
And especially in a big company, like TELUS, it's all about your relationships across the organization. I'm sure that's the case in everything. But that's why those tools, like with my team at TELUS, when this first started, we used to do a 15-minute call every morning just to see what is everybody doing today, where are you at, and we actually establishing our own rules as a team around what's a conference call, what's a IM versus an email, and really being very, it takes a different kind of work.
This is a popular question in the room. Young people, especially those with families, are leaving Vancouver. Why pay young people so much less for higher skills?
Do we?
Got to start somewhere.
Is that an accusation?
Yeah.
Well, I can only speak to my particular business. To be honest, freelancing, and basically anyone in publishing right now, it's staff positions are few and far between, and they don't pay particularly well. Freelance as an income is no longer, at least in this city, is no longer a self-sustaining enterprise. Like, you have to be doing something else if you're going to be a magazine writer. You're also teaching, you're also doing corporate communications, that sort of thing. It is a real problem for people in our industry. I've lost, a lot of the good writers that used to write for me are no longer in the business. They've moved on to bigger and better things. So
baristas?
No, but like they're in corporate communications. They're teaching. They're lecturing on this and that and the other thing. But they can't make a living doing what we do for industry. So that's the sad reality of what's happening right now. And I think part of that's just been driven by sort of a technological shift where, like with the advent of blogs and such, that everyone's got a platform now, and they don't need a magazine necessarily to be heard, and they don't necessarily expect a lot of compensation for that, and they have other jobs that are paying the bills.
So in the process, are we just lowering everyone's expectations? I mean, does it make sense to get a recent grad with a young family and pay them a lot just because they come with a lot of skills, or is there a trial process, or how would you approach it, Chris?
Well, I mean, I think there's got to be a fair value exchange. There's got to be something that an employer is getting out of the resources, and that compensation has to make sense for the employee, and it will correct itself fairly quickly because people won't be able to get stuff done. There won't be able to be production in the economy. So I think the market will find its equilibrium around the price point for labour of the required skill. I think it's thinking about what are the skills that are necessary in the industry or in your chosen path and career, and how do you maximise your opportunity to get that across a 40-year, whatever it is, working life time frame. One of the things that I've seen really emerging recently is this concept of boomerang employees. People that work for you early in their career then go off and do something else for whatever reason, get some more broader life experience, and then they become incredibly attractive employees to get back at a more senior level. And I think that is a trend that is likely to continue, actually, as opportunities in hierarchies become much flatter. People need to think a little bit broader about how they progress, and it's relatively few organisations that really have the breadth to allow people to keep progressing in those portfolio careers. I count myself both quite unusual and really lucky to have been able to do 20 years with one organisation, have done 14 different jobs and felt like I've progressed in all of them. At some point that's going to continue, and it's only through having that flexibility about where I work and what I do within a very large global organisation that's afforded me the opportunity to do it. So I think it's compromising.
Here's something practical that you can consider, all of you. In general, this question's a popular one. What are the best and worst characteristics of new grads as employees? Best and worst. Who would be the executive search?
Okay, so I think some of the best characteristics of new graduates, and even in the first 5 to 10 years of being out in the workforce, is the ability to be resilient and flexible. I think those two are not easy to achieve, and I think if you continue to have them along the way, you can also become a strong leader, because those would help you in adapting your style to different people that work for you. And I think it takes time. I think resilience is, and it's interesting because if you even look at K-12, I have kids that are in the K-12 system, and they're talking about resilience early on, and they're really starting to pull those values together. So I think it's important if they can carry that through.
And what about a negative?
Well, and I'm going to go back to the it's wonderful of the thousands of connections, which is great, but I think there has to be a bit of purpose to it, and so I think you can get lost a little bit in that if there isn't some of the deeper relationships.
It's not wide, it's deep.
Yeah.
I see.
Yeah.
Prem, anything to add to that?
I would agree with, in terms of that sort of the best thing, this idea of grit is sort of a trend. It's there's TED Talks about this. It is something that they teach you in large companies about, what is grit? Is grit really teachable? Is it something that's instinctual? Is it that...
How do you define grit?
I think it's that resilience. It's keeping things moving forward, and it's not about having blinders on and just like, I'm going to get this thing done and piss as many people off as I can. It's actually being sensitive to all the things around you. And again, very typical Gen Xer kind of thing is like, you kind of have a lot of grit because you're sort of classified as this generation that just had very low expectations. And the generation sort of behind us, where it was like, we're just going to keep working hard and we'll get the rewards. And that's what I see as sort of part of that grittiness, I suppose, is different. But there's one of the things that again, because TELUS is my most recent example, is that they recruit new grads from some of the top universities, and over 2 years they would get a cross-disciplinary, every 6 months they change jobs within the organization. And and with the idea that really creating smart kind of generalists or people that aren't necessarily super specialists in one area. But I still think there's room for specialists, because I was always sort of that specialist person. I was always focused in one, I always had a media or entertainment, or even on the technology side, it was always focused on that. That there is something, you can be this sort of jack of all trades, but then what do you really, like what really feeds your soul? And really think that, that can get lost in some of that. And I think it's similar to what you were saying. It's like you have all these relationships, but where are those core relationships? And what are they going to bring to whatever situation? But ultimately, what's giving you your fire in the belly is what will drive you forward.
So that passion should also be reflected in that important job interview, for example. Go for the job if you really, really want it.
You know pretty quickly when somebody's not really fully, this is a checkbox for them. And that's fine, but you want to see something more.
Matt, thoughts on best and worst?
I'm going to focus on the negative. I think the one thing, it's sort of a caution for, and I just see it again and again, is this sense of entitlement that I graduated, here I am, and just a sense of opportunities should now fall on their lap. And I think maybe just speaking to what Prem was saying, and because I basically of the same generation, is that you never assumed. Anyway, when I entered the workforce all those years ago, I never assumed that anything would come of it. I just have to beaver away at it until I got noticed, and then hopefully that would lead to something else, and so on. But I didn't think within a year of getting the job I would be, the managing editor of the New York Times or something like that. And I think that unfortunately there's what I've seen just in terms of like interns who've come through the magazine and
they're expecting this kind of a climb as opposed to this kind of a climb.
Or just don't know how to deal with feedback, or don't know how to sort of work through that process of, okay, this wasn't good, but it'll get better, and understanding that there's a trajectory there, and it's not like this, it's like that,
Okay. Chris, would you like to weigh in? Or we wanted...
Well, I think we've kind of covered it. I certainly think on the negative, that lack of appreciation of experience and the impatience. I know everything because I've graduated, and you old farts don't know anything, so I'm not going to listen to you. I think there is a little bit of that can come through. On the positive, there's definitely a resilience and an energy. There's also a piece around challenging the status quo, and I think the bravery to challenge that status quo is really important from young employees. It's just making sure it doesn't cross the line into the arrogance of youth.
Well, we really like to turn it over to the audience now, and many of you have already been participating by selecting some of the questions, and we've already addressed some of the more popular questions that are in the system. Let's move on with, while there is talent, it's hard to attract good talent when the cost of living is higher and we are paid less. What incentives do you give companies to establish here? Give companies to establish here? I don't know if the employees or to... Should companies be given?
Not really a question for me
Not
to
really.
answer.
Right? I mean, that's kind of a broad...
I can answer it a little bit. Sure. Because the reason we are one of the reasons we're the visual effects leader is that we have the schools producing the talent is definitely key. But, the province has attractive tax credits for a company out of Australia called Animal Logic to come here and set up a big office and they're the guys that do the Lego movies, and they're now going to bring our talent level up even higher so that those people will be globally attractive to even more people. They might go start their own animation companies. So those kind of incentives are, we've seen Sony ImageWorks, Animal Logic, Double Negative. That's been an industry that's been built because of an incentive, in part.
Okay. Now Jessica is at the back of the room here with the microphone. If you'd like to get her attention, she can direct it over. Sure, great.
Just to pose this question a slightly different way, organizations in this province like the BC Business Council have for some years made the constant observation that they're relative to other Canadian centres. Vancouver has very few head offices relative to Calgary, relative to Toronto, and until recently Montreal. For Chris, and I think, is it Shalina, especially in the executive headhunting area, what kind of challenges does that present for the two of you, and particularly for the business culture in Vancouver, which is probably, I would perhaps negatively impacted by the fact that there isn't that critical mass of head offices?
I'd say, so in no particular order, one of the big challenges is that because people are also working longer and they're not retiring as early as they used to, and it's great, people are healthier, they're making good choices, they tend to stay in some of the senior roles for a very long time, and so you don't have that natural attrition that you'd like to see that sort of opens up the door, and they've really become quite accustomed to living here in Vancouver. They like the lifestyle, they've actually made it work financially. So that is a challenge. I find that because there aren't the corporate head offices, if we're not going to see some of the movement at the top happen, then we're not going to allow for those opportunities for some of the young people to go in. It is a challenge when we're recruiting talent to Vancouver, and in almost every search we do, we're looking across the country and looking globally for many people. And almost the first conversation we'll have with individuals that we chat with is around the realities of living in Vancouver and the cost of living here and what that means, how that translates. And so, I think I brought it up in the beginning, people will actually trade dollars to come out and live in Vancouver. And Chris will comment on that, but it happens. People feel that their lifestyle is worth quite a bit to them. And they'll move from a big home in Windsor, and they'll buy, a condo, and they'll change the way their lifestyle is. So there's just trade-offs that you see. And so I think from our point of view, it's really understanding what's important to certain leaders that we're trying to bring into the community. Maybe it's not important that they replicate their situation, their personal situation that they have.
Well, you touched on something that I want to build on with the other panelists as well, and that's if you're not getting that attrition or people are staying a lot longer, you're not creating those opportunities, because one of our popular questions is recent graduates often find it difficult to climb up the ladder. They feel stuck in entry-level positions. Any advice? What are some good tactics for showing that you're able and willing to move up?
I think it's this thing about building your networks is really important, because anytime I've gotten a job or moved forward, or it has been through my relationships or my reputation or my community work or something. So it's not just about what you do at work when it comes to community service or whatever it is that you're doing, that all of that, you don't know where these opportunities are actually going to come from. You may not move up in that organization itself, but it is that value on what you're doing in your community. I actually value very highly in individuals when I'm looking at, people I'm hiring, or if I'm recommending people. I often get asked for recommendations if anytime I've looked for a position, I'm looking for someone, I ask my friends who I trust.
So don't be too narrow focused and just thinking, I want to move from this desk to that desk.
Yeah.
Think about it more in a broader sense. Matt, any thoughts on that?
Well, and sort of the corollary to that is don't burn any bridges, especially in this town. It's such a small town that we all have run-ins and disagreements with people, but just be very aware of the fact that if you want to make British Columbia your home, you're going to have to play nice with a lot of people that you may not want to play nice with sometimes.
Okay.
I'm speaking for British
Good honest advice.
Any other career advice on how to get the attention of the boss and move up the ladder, Chris?
Do a good job. I mean, it is do a good job and be relevant. I mean, nobody likes the person that comes up with the irrelevant ideas. You've got to make yourself relevant. And I think, the other guys have said it in terms of thinking about your network and how you're relevant to everybody in your network, so that you've got something that's memorable about you. You've done a good job, and you've got that credibility and confidence of people who are looking for employees.
But does it just happen randomly? Should there be a checks and balances, as we were saying? Should there be a survey, or should bosses be doing sort of a sweep of the room regularly to gauge that? Who is doing it?
So, I mean, I think it's a fundamental part of the management responsibility is to notice. It's to notice the talent. It's to notice the breadth and diversity of the talent that you've got around you and encourage it. Identify potential and then encourage the realization of that potential. I think that, that's a core attribute of leadership, and it lacks management not to do it, quite frankly. So yes, I do think you have to be active in it. But if an employee wants to maximize their chances, make it easy to notice.
Okay, but don't show up with their hand up outside your office every 10 minutes, that kind of thing. There's a fine balance there.
It's about relevance.
I'd love to hear from some employers. Yeah, here we have someone over here. Great.
Hi. So I was going to pick up on a point that was made earlier with respect to dealing with the negative with millennials. So how do you deal with some of the spoiled, entitled millennials that have unrealistic expectations when they're starting out a job, and then within months they want to get promoted and they want to earn more, bonuses, perks, etc. As an employer, I find it challenging, and I don't know if I ever want to hire another millennial again. I'd rather pay more to someone with more experience.
How do you deal with it?
Outside of firing, what are the options? I mean, you try to manage expectations. Or you want me to answer my own question?
Well, no, I just think we're getting how different people. No, but you're saying it bothers you.
Okay,
but it's obviously you're just saying you want them to be patient. Do you have that conversation, or it's like your expectations are unrealistic?
Oh, we had multiple conversations. But outside of firing, what are some of your options?
It's a bit like the old, I think it was Einstein quote, I'm always ready to learn, but I'm not always ready to be taught. And I think there are many employees that are not ready to be taught. And you've got to find a way, I think, to penetrate that and get them to be receptive to the ideas and sit down and have that chat with them, put them in touch with mentors, think about different directions to provide that support network around them. And frankly, if they don't take the bait, then fire them. I mean,
But are we just talking, does that really exist, that whole millennials? That's the other question. Do you notice a difference between millennials and previous generations? Are they as entitled as we
I've had
paint
both.
them? Okay.
I've had both. If we're talking specifically about that, aren't millennials now 35? By the way, it's not like these.
Gen Z.
There's a new name now. I've actually had both, and sometimes it's been just a personality, and usually it's someone who you try the coaching and you're giving the feedback and giving examples, and here's techniques you might try. And I had someone at one point who just wouldn't listen to anybody's ideas and didn't understand a concept of fair process and negotiation, and would ultimately want it her way. And it's like, well, you're not gonna survive so long, that's kind of, you do get to that point. But I've also had exceptional people who do adapt and listen and are nimble. So I don't paint millennials in the,
They may be getting a bad rap.
In my experience, it's been both, but more on the positive side. But I think it's more of the, you talked about it because I heard you on the radio with Gloria this afternoon, was this idea of how often you give feedback, how you're doing it, why you're doing it, giving a lot of context. People clearly, as a leader, I've come to understand, the clearer you are with your goals and objectives, the more people will get it and come along, or not. But I've seen both, so I can't say that I've had only negative experiences.
I realized in saying that I started a bit of a fire, and this is a raging debate about millennials.
You're not the first. Yeah,
no, I know, but I'm sensitive about that because not long ago I'm sure people were saying things like that about my generation coming out of school to a certain extent. But I think there are certain things that we can say just about. I don't know if it's just from in the era of social media that kids these days, have a certain sensitivity about their reputation, sensitivity of how they're perceived, sensitivity about their own importance in the world, because social media gives you this sense of immediate importance, like everyone's listening to you, and if they like your comment, if 1,000 people like your comment, that means that comment must have been really important. So I think to my mind, that's part of what I've been observing, bringing in interns, junior staffers, etc. Is that, and so to answer your question, I think one of the tricks that I learned is that give them a project where they feel important. Give them some responsibility to handle a major feature in the magazine, let's say, or to write an investigative piece. They have to deliver. Yeah. They absolutely have to deliver. They have to give me something that's good. But that, I think, when you start to trust them to take on a big project, then they're probably a little more likely to listen to you the next time you have some criticism about something they might not be doing so well. So that's the only thing that I've seen that works. But to Prem's point, there's some people you just can't.
Yeah, but there always have been, right. I think.
Well, that's just it.
I see that you have a question here, but we're going to take this one here first.
So, I mean, we're talking about different generations, and, some think, well, some were entitled, some were not, and, and I think, kids these days kind of thing, everybody always looks at the young people being entitled, but I think previous generations where they put out their hand and an employer gave them the high five, but today they put out their hand, it's no high five, so they go like this, maybe down low, and then they keep holding out their hand there, and so maybe it looks like they're begging, so they must be willing to take less money. I don't know, that's just what it seems.
You should learn the company handshake, you mean, before you start, so everybody's on the same page.
Yeah. But
I see your point.
different decades have had different issues. So, there was a race issue, and especially so, in the States. So, say black people not being paid as well. Then, 80s and even till today, women, so gender being a factor of discrimination. Is age the new thing that we need to tackle? Is this the new, so we've tackled in some ways also sexual orientation, but maybe age is the next one.
Okay, that's an interesting point. And I mean, and how is that tied to technology in some ways? I mean, as Matt was sort of talking about, if you get 1,000 likes, then you're popular, and that sort of starts to drive the whole agenda in a way. But Prem, I'd like to hear your thoughts.
I would say that we haven't actually tackled other forms of women being paid less, or who's in leadership positions. If we look at boards of directors in our city, those head offices that we do have here, who's actually running those, like in senior leadership, that actually hasn't changed that much. I'm part of a board of an organization called Women in View, where we publish a study. We've been doing it for years, but this year it actually got some attention on the fact that female directors in Canada for television and film, only 17% of film and TV projects are produced by women, and within that, Aboriginal women and women of color are basically zero. So there's the equity of who's actually getting the opportunities, which is probably a whole other panel discussion, but also we know they're being paid a lot less too, those women who are getting those directing gigs, and you're seeing more of this in sort of US media right now with some of the Hollywood actresses. But those, I think that's still part of it, that it's not something that we've tackled and checked the box on. It's my editorial.
I think we had an alumni UBC segment on that I hosted at some point in the future. Let's squeeze in a couple of more questions because we're going to have to wrap up the discussion. Yes?
Yes, I'm a Gen Xer with the heart of a millennial. And just in reference to some of the other comments over there, I would submit that every single generation through history has been labeled as entitled. So I think we need to keep that in mind. In terms of, there's been a lot of reference to climbing the ladder. And there's an interesting dichotomy there, because I think we've still got the vestiges of that hierarchical climb the ladder model, while at the same time we're seeing new ways of doing work. And especially with the advent of social media, et cetera, I think instead of being that critical person climbing the ladder. It's probably more important, and folks have alluded to this, strive to be a network hub. Strive to be that person that people go to find the answer to a problem. Strive to be that person that you're the first phone call that people reach out to. Last comment I want to make, and this was in relation to, how the hell do I deal with these millennials? They want a gold star and a hug every 5 minutes. What the heck? I would say a couple of things. One, it's the biggest generation in the workplace now. So learn how to deal with it. The other, I would say, and this has been referenced, I think it's a very important point, whether it pertains to feedback or compensation, look long and hard at sprinkling that more often and breadcrumbing that more often. So not an annual event, but a quick hit chat, not an annual increase, but some interim increases along the way.
Good points, good points. For the record, I've been at CBC for 27 years and I still like gold stars and hugs. they're kind of fun too, but I understand the point you're making. Those were all good points. The gentleman in the white shirt here, and we have one woman over here as well, that perhaps that'll be our last one. Okay.
I'll be quick, but just on the millennials, to me the biggest issue, I'm certainly nowhere close to a millennial. I'm like 60. It's a big group of people, and they are diverse, and employers want them all to be the same. They're not the same. Some want lots of money, some want to work hard, some want to go home. It's a much more diverse workforce than it ever was before. But my question is this issue of salaries and paying less here and still people coming, I question whether that's a good thing. And use of interns. Like, if I was a millennial and you come out of university and all of a sudden they want you to be an intern, some underpaid or not paid at all person, or, the best you're going to do here is a freelancer, what do we expect out of those people? When I graduated from university, I went to law school, I went to a firm, and I was in the firm right away. And I was going up a ladder and I was becoming something. Today, I think we, as employers, my biggest concern is, what are we offering back for all of this nice low-priced labor and living in little buildings and stuff? What's the thing we're giving? And if all it is nice training to go somewhere else, that's a bad model.
Does it surprise you, that Matt gave us that data off the top, that pay was actually very low on that satisfaction level, and much of the conversation today has been dominated by talk about salary moving up, getting more pay.
I'm not sure people are always truthful about the salary issue. Because if you're fussed about it, you're going to be fussed about it, so why talk about it? But I think it's, who I work with is really important, but let me telecommute. There's a problem. There's a disconnect with the answers you're getting. And I think people do want to be paid well and do want to be rewarded well for what they get paid for what they do. And I don't think as employers we're necessarily sending that message, especially here. Come to British Columbia, set up your video show. Come here, our employees are cheap. They're great, they're cheap. We should be saying our employees are better. We give lots of stuff to them so they can be more productive and stronger, and you can pay them better. Not they're cheaper than in Alberta.
Would you say that's the message that's getting out, Chris?
Yeah, I think from my point of view, that is right, and certainly from from HSBC's perspective, there is a real desire to be based in Vancouver. We are the only bank that's headquartered in Vancouver. I see that as really important. It's strategically aligned with our heritage in Asia, and Vancouver is kind of a Pacific Rim city is really important to us in that way. So I think there is certainly from a parochial perspective a lot more to it than labour's cheap. It's about having that diaspora. It's about having that diversity. It's about having that thought and that commitment. And as I say, I've been here relatively short period of time. But the piece around the people who I work with, the receptivity of British Columbians to work, to opportunity, to think flexibly, to think differently is much higher than perhaps I've seen in some of the other locations that I've worked. So I think you're absolutely right. There is a balance. There's an equilibrium to find in this. Whether that balance is right or not at the moment, I guess we can all have our own opinions, and time will tell. And the outcomes will speak volumes. And I think, as is anything, there'll be winners and people who are less successful in that, and there'll be good outcomes and bad outcomes. I think it is dangerous to generalise. There's this dichotomy between stereotypes form for all sorts of reasons, but they're incredibly dangerous because they mask the truth of, I think the human race has been diverse forever, and that manifests itself.
The other thing I would add to this is that it's, we're more mobile than we ever have been before. I can speak to this, I know Prem can. I mean, at a certain point in my career, to get a promotion, to get a pay increase, I moved to Toronto. And I don't begrudge Vancouver and BC for being expensive, but that was just the reality. If I wanted to take the next step, I had to leave the city. And the market decides in these respects, that it's ultimately, Vancouver will never be a head office town. We will never pay the best salaries in this country, and we've got to deal with it.
Well, both you and Prem made the comment that leaving the city was one of the best things you did in terms of being seen differently when you come back to Vancouver. You're sort of seen like, oh, you've done the big city thing.
Well, we both Matt and I moved to Toronto around the same time frame, and we both worked in media. So I was working for a broadcaster here, moved to Toronto to take a more of a corporate job that wasn't in this market. And then ultimately I got recruited with TELUS to move back here, which is kind of where I wanted to be because it was April and the snowbanks were this high. But it made me more attractive in this market, if I'm honest. To have experience in a bigger city in my area made me, I think, it upped my market value. And if I'd gotten that job here, it probably would have done the same, but that job didn't exist here at that time.
I see. I did tell you that we would take one more question here, so the woman in white. Thank you.
Thank you. I just wanted to say, as a baby boomer, to represent the other end of the continuum, part of the work that I do as a contractor is to help people figure out the hidden job market. But the biggest challenge I've got now, I have incredibly talented professionals from all over the world. And they come to the college, they come to, where I work part-time at Vancouver Community College. I'm sorry, it's not at UBC, but that's where we're doing it. And the issue is, they are incredibly talented, but there aren't any mentors willing to give them a chance. And it seems like there's not much glue left for those helping another round of people who could quickly give back. And
because the workplace is too thin, or because they're not interested?
It's that whole thing of you haven't got, quote, Canadian experience, but very few people seem to be willing to give it. In Ontario, there are more mentors. There's more hubs of mentors. And I'm hoping that more is there a way to give incentives for more corporations to give them that leg up, because they can quickly turn around, and they're so willing to mentor the next group of people coming once we can get that ball going.
Benefits of mentors? Chris, do you want, or Prem, do you?
Well, I know when I was leaving TELUS, there was a trial program with an immigrant services agency where they were actually pairing new immigrants with different people at different levels, so from the executive level to the junior level. And that was just starting, and I think with the influx of the Syrian refugees, we're actually seeing more of that in the corporate world.
So the thing I would say is I've personally been a huge beneficiary of mentorship within my career, and hopefully I pay that forward in what I do every day, because I think it is absolutely critical to get that diverse view of experience and that grounding and people you can talk to. We have a fairly well-developed mentorship opportunity within HSBC for our employees around the world, and we have employee resource groups that focus on that and put people in touch with senior executives. I think the broader problem is back to this: what's the depth of the senior head office resource pool in BC that fuels the availability of people with the breadth of experience to give that mentorship here? But I think there are opportunities out there, and certainly from a local, from a local perspective with HSBC, I think we do an okay job at that, actually. You can always do more. But I would be a huge advocate of any mentorship, because I wouldn't be sat here tonight if it wasn't for a really big network of people that have been important in my career and my development.
Well, to wrap up this discussion, I'd really like to just get a couple of quick suggestions. There are a lot of interested eyes and ears in the room about sort of future prospects. Are there companies, as we talk about changing workplace trends, are there companies that come to mind for you? Maybe not necessarily your own, but if so, then you can certainly feel free to add that one. And companies that are adapting well to the changing workplace, and that might be places that the people that are in the audience tonight could bookmark for the future. Matt, you're farthest away. We'll start at your end if you want to. Or sectors, if you like.
I don't know. I mean, I'm still sort of intrigued by this whole idea of the unlimited vacation.
Yeah.
How do I get onto that? Which is Build Direct. But I think maybe I'll just speak a little more broadly. I think what I observe from the magazine standpoint is what BC is really good at is entrepreneurialism, starting your own business. There's a real sort of an ecosystem here and supportive ecosystem to start your own business, and especially in creative endeavors. I think it's a really good place to do that. I think people get inspiration from their locale, but also there's a growing, whether it's in the tech community or arts, there's, Prem can speak to this, but a higher percentage of population here works in arts and culture than anywhere else in the country. And so that's certainly why I'm here. That's why I'm back here, because for me it was the right balance of both.
You're putting hope in the company of you.
Yeah. And increasingly in the media business, what we see is this. It used to be media company brands that were important. Now it's individual brands. On the cover of the April issue of BC Business is this woman by the name of Sunny Lenarduzzi. Famous last name. Father was, some of you will know, with the Whitecaps. She is like one of the biggest social media stars in Canada, and she's built a brand around herself and her expertise. And I think that's sort of the future.
Okay, Prem.
Yeah, I would build on that, definitely as being the champion of British Columbia's creative industries, that there is kind of venture interest with BC Tech Fund that the province announced a few months ago. That entrepreneurial spirit is really driving. What we're seeing now is, so this virtual effects, gaming industry with EA, these were all entrepreneurs who started those things and built industry here. We're seeing the same thing starting to happen with virtual reality, artificial intelligence. And not just being used for entertainment purposes, but how do you use that in life sciences and other things? And there's companies, small companies that will soon be big, Vancouver Island as an example, that these are actually industries that didn't exist before. These are new things, and that's what, I would agree with Matt, that we've kind of really been good at. We probably know a lot of people in common. I have lots of friends who are their own CEOs of their own tech companies specifically focused in the creative sector, and they may have come from other big places, but they wanted to come back here, so they're doing their own thing, and they've been able to do that here. And our location to Silicon Valley, just like we're Hollywood North, we're kind of Silicon Valley North. There's a lot of back and forth happening.
Shalina.
So I guess the piece that I want to leave everyone with is that, and we've talked a lot about the media and the technology and the digital side, and we haven't touched on one of the largest employers, which is the public sector. And I think if we think about opportunities here in this province, and if there's an interest to stay, passion and purpose are so important to individuals coming out. And if you think about the public sector, the higher academic sector, the not-for-profit sector, these are huge employers here in British Columbia. And I think they're always, and I actually think they've been movers and shakers when it comes to being some of the better employers. They're probably not on the leading edge, some of them, but they've definitely had to be creative to try and retain talent and keep talent here. So I think if it's about passion and purpose, and obviously you want to make a really good living doing it, because you can't give the pay up, but you can find those really neat opportunities here. And so I think keeping an open mind to those opportunities.
Yeah, HSBC.
I knew it.
No, I mean, I think there are very many companies that do a really good job. I think there are some companies, and I will put HSBC in this category, all joking aside, do some things really, really well and have got acres of room to improve on the other side and in other areas. The industry that's not come up tonight and the sector that's not come up tonight is really around sustainability and green tech, which I think is going to be one that's quite interesting, particularly around here. I mean, Vancouver is one of the greenest cities around, and I think that whole sustainability drive will continue to be a big trend.
Great. Well, thank you all for being here for such a stimulating discussion, and thanks very much to our panelists for sharing your perspective. It's been great to hear all your points of view. I think I will turn things back over to Fred Lee.
Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in giving this esteemed panel and our moderator a fine round of applause. Clearly, our audience was engaged. There's many questions here that we unfortunately weren't able to get to, but I know this panel has kindly agreed, along with Gloria, to join everyone for the reception afterwards. As mentioned, this evening's discussion will be made available as a podcast and video on our digital library. So to access these recordings, see photos from past events, I invite everyone to go to alumni.ubc.ca. There you'll find an extensive library of thought-provoking topics, many from the past 7 years of Your Next Step and others. So please feel free to consider subscribing so you don't miss any of the discussions. Additionally, thanks to our friends at the Irving K. Barber Learning Center, this discussion will also be available on their website as a webcast. There are many ways to stay connected to your alma mater. Some easy ways, such as attending an event like this, reading Trek, either the hard copy, which we still have, or online, as well learn of the many services and programs and initiatives that Alumni UBC offers. Some upcoming events to note on your calendar. Our next Alumni networking event is on March 31st. That's in Vancouver's Financial District. Our host will be Devil's Elbow Ale and Smokehouse. On April 5th, Harvard professor Dr. Naomi Oreskes will be speaking at the Vogue Theater. She is part of the Wall Institute's Wall Exchange, and she'll be speaking on climate change denial. Where do we go from here? And on April 9th, we have the Live Right Health Forum that will feature many of our illustrious alumni, medical experts that will be speaking on the advanced treatment and research for liver disease, and that's at Broadway Church. Finally, we will conclude our centennial year on May 28th. UBC 100, What's Next, will feature a very special guest, William Shatner. Will be joining us as part of our centennial year close activities. William Shatner will be speaking on curiosity. As well, I'm not sure if many of you have entered yet, but we invite you to do so. Every alumni is eligible for our car contest. All you have to do is go to our website and enter. Nothing else other than to enter, and you will be you'll have a chance to win a brand new 2016 Volkswagen Jetta, and that's courtesy of our friends at Cowell Auto Group. Finally, of course, we encourage everyone to sign up for an Alumni A card. It's absolutely free, and it gets you opportunities to access a lot of the programs and services from our many partners, including Avis Car Rental, the BC Lions, and other providers. Finally, I know you've all been waiting for this, the winner of our prize draw this evening, and someone I'm sure you want to get to know. She is a career coach from iSolve Consulting. Congratulations, Maria Bulil. I believe that's how you pronounce your last name. See me afterwards. You've just won something fabulous. Now, of course, to conclude, we want to thank our sponsors again, Cathay Pacific, CBC, Manulife, Alumni Insurance, and our webcast partner, Irving K. Barber Learning Center. I now invite all of you to join us for the complimentary reception. As mentioned, we have many employers in the room. We have many students who are graduating in the room. We have our esteemed panel. I know you want to have a chance to mix and mingle with everyone. So I now invite you all to a complimentary reception. Thank you, everyone.